So overall, I would say if one wants to take this paper, it should solely be on the basis of one's interest, abilities, and background, and the preparation strategy. I mean, does it fit into the entire overall preparation strategy of yours or not?
UPSC Civil Services exam. We've always looked at this exam with a lot of fear instead of inspiration and positivity. Today, I have an intention to change that. And to do that, I have with me Madhav, who has cleared Civil Services exam in his second attempt with a lot of hard work. And today, in this interview with Madhav, we will try and inspire you, give you some positive insights into civil services examination, rather than trying to talk about fearful things that might push you away from the exam, rather than taking it head on and trying to clear it with all your might. First of all, Madhav, congratulations on the selection.
Thank you so much, sir.
Uh, can you just introduce yourself to the students about your educational background? Where do you belong to? What inspired you to write UPSC Civil Services? Why are you here? And then we'll get on with whatever comes ahead.
Sure, sir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. Hi, all. My name is Madhav Bhardwaj. I belong to Missouri. I completed my schooling from Weinberg Allen, Missouri till class 12. After that, I joined NIT Allahabad and finished my engineering in computer science. Post which I joined IIM Ahmedabad and finished my MBA in 2020. So once my MBA was completed, I started working with Microsoft. I worked with Microsoft for 2 years, and currently I am working as a head of product in a startup. So while working at Microsoft, it was COVID and I had some free time. So I decided to pursue my childhood dream, which has been joining the civil services, because I mean, I could manage at that point of time preparing and working simultaneously because of the luxury that one would call work from home.
What was it like preparing for civil services kind of an exam while working somewhere already? Because there are so many students who prepare solely for UPSC, and even then find it difficult to manage, all the subjects that they have to cover. So, how did you manage? Like, what was it like to be juggling between these two things?
So, sir, juggling between these two things, initially, it becomes initially when I started, because when you're starting reading about civil services and the syllabus that is in it, you're reading history, geography, it is very enjoyable. So, initial few months, you don't even realize because it seems like a pastime only. However, when you have to go on repetition again and again and again, it becomes a little overwhelming. So, juggling the two is a struggle. But what like I mentioned before, what worked for me was that my job started from home. It was peak COVID. I was in Missouri, lockdown, very less to do. So after work, I invested my time in preparing for the exam, and that helped me. So, but after 2 years, when I did not make it through my first attempt, I had to change my job because it was getting a little overwhelming, because it was difficult to manage both the job and the preparation. And I think mains is very demanding. During that time, you cannot do it with the job. So then I joined the job again after mains. But I think for between prelims and mains in this attempt, I was not working.
So, did you ever think, like after first attempt when you could not clear, did you think that I should maybe choose one of these two rather than trying to manage both of them at the same time, dropping the job or dropping civil services?
No, dropping civil services was too early. That was not an option. But yes, I chose to. I think I realized after my first attempt that at least the mains exams needs a little more focus. After prelims, that those 3 months are very grueling, and if you're working also at that point of time, you may end up compromising a year. So that is when I decided to quit Microsoft, and I just focused on preparing for mains exams, and once that was completed, I started working again.
Something that I just thought about is this year's prelims.
Yes, sir.
Now, recently, I just went through the paper, and I surprisingly and unfortunately, I felt that the paper was, yes, the pattern was different, but we cannot say that it was out of the word or very difficult according to UPSC standards. That's what I felt. Yes, some areas like history were difficult and there were some questions from law. So, my question is, what exactly would you say is the problem with a lot of students who are preparing and are not able to clear prelims even after multiple attempts? What's wrong? What's not working? Because you were able to clear the examination in a second attempt itself. So you must have worked on a lot of things that must have went wrong, must have gone wrong in your first attempt. So what exactly do you think is the problem there?
I would say that one thing that I've realized about prelims, and that is my assessment of prelims, is that they're changing the pattern every year, and probably they claim that it is to discourage the coaching institutions. They're making CSAT very difficult. And one thing that I realized about prelims is that in prelims, what is also required apart from the knowledge that you've garnered over the years is presence of mind. And I think people under that pressure, that 2 hours and 100 questions and difficult questions, you see the first 5 questions and you do not even know for sure what is the answer, and then you anyway, trip down and fall. In that case, if you can hold on to yourself and you keep that presence of mind, there are certain questions which are doable. And I am this is not my comment based on this year's prelims, because I haven't written this year's prelims, so that'll be unfair to say or talk on that. But this is what I would say based on my last year prelims. So I wrote prelims after not being selected in the from the interview. So it was hardly 3 or 4 days after the result had come that we wrote prelims again. And it was just that I kept my cool, and I had some presence of mind at that moment, and the cumulative gyan over the years that helped me clear the prelims last year. So I would say presence of mind and keeping a little calm if possible is important, because prelims you can actually eliminate and get the right answer also.
Because now I have two interesting questions coming up. One is with respect to management optional, because you cleared using management optional, but there is no guidance or very limited guidance available in this optional. And a lot of students feel that they can develop their skills, including presence of mind and knowledge and all these things, only if they have the right guidance or only if they have guidance available. So, what do you think about this? Because you've gone through this phase and without any notable guidance, you've done it. So, what would you tell those students, or what is your experience based on the optional?
In terms of my optional, when I was deciding an optional, I had to look at what options did I have. And I was also doing it with the job. So I had to be pragmatic that way, that how much time can I commit. I was fresh out of college in 2020, and the concepts were also fresh to some extent. And I had my notes and my books with me. So when I was considering optionals, one thing I think I narrowed down on mathematics and management. Now I looked at management paper, and when I saw the past year papers, I thought that अगर मुझे इस वक्त कोई बैठा के कराए without any level of preparation, I'll be able to solve it. मतलब probably not up to the mark that any UPSC requires, but I can solve this paper. It's doable. I looked at maths and I realized that it is going to be, it's going to be rewarding, but it's going to be a huge time commitment. And doing it with a job, no background in GS, because coming from an engineering and MBA background, I think that also needed sufficient time. And that is when I decided that I'll go ahead with management only, because again, I've done my post-graduation in it and it makes logical sense. However, that is when I first realized that there's no guidance available. And I underestimated the value of guidance also. I like, oh, so what? I'll do it myself. And I looked at a few toppers video, for example, Anuj Jindal sir. I referred to the books that sir referred to and the way he had guided us. Then eventually there were more toppers. There's Pratik Rao sir, who's helped me a lot, Raghav Jain sir, and then last year Pankaj Yadav sir. So from each of their notes, each of their learnings, I've tried to inculcate something into my answers. For example, Raghav Jain sir had highlighted the importance of doing numericals. And while Pratik sir had told me the importance of drawing those diagrams right. And while again Pankaj Yadav sir taught me how to put in examples everywhere. So it's their guidance, but however, it's also the faith in what you are comfortable with. I was comfortable with these two subjects, but I did not have the luxury of time during that time to be able to do maths also full time along with GS preparation. So management, I would say, was less effort for me. And I thought that probably I'll manage both of them. And it worked out fine for me this year, but I'm not sure whether I would have said the same thing last year.
Mhm. So, can we say that even if no or limited guidance is available to any person, any student, it is possible to clear this examination using the standard texts as you and using the standard approach?
I think it is certainly possible because even the names I mentioned before, they did it without any guidance.
Hmm.
And I think it's just some text there. UPSC specified all the syllabus, what they're expecting. You have the past year papers, and you as a person know yourself the best. Management has a good element of mathematics also in it. So I got the best of both worlds there. So I would say that yes, it is certainly possible to do it without guidance also. I mean, if depending on your capabilities, abilities, and comprehension skills. Yeah.
Since you prepared while working, and I'm assuming that because you were working, so your structuring skills and organization skills must have been developed already to a certain extent, which I feel needs a lot of improvement amongst a lot of students out there preparing for the exam. What exactly was your timetable like? Not day by day, but how did you structure yourself to be able to prepare simultaneously with your work and also to manage GS, essay writing, prelims, as well as optional together? So, do you have a certain timeline that you can create, and or you can go back and provide me with something?
So if I recollect, I think I started on the 21st of May in 2020. And that time I started with the basic NCRTs of the GS, and they were very basic. So I think I remember I used to finish one NCRT book a day. And once that was done, and I had some basic idea of what is happening around in histories and the geographies and also polity to some extent, I thought that since main prelims is in May next year, I may as well start my optional and get done with it. So what I used to do typically on a day, and I always have a style of studying that I kind of start slow. I do the manual labor, and I'll tell you what I mean by manual labor. In the beginning, I and then gradually I move on to, as the exam comes closer, I increase my number of hours and my dedication and my you know the weightage I give to my preparation. So in terms of manual labor that I was speaking about, started preparing notes for management somewhere around, I think, July 1st of July. Maybe I began to prepare notes in 2020, and by September end I was done. So I would say 3 months of notes. And manual labor is easy. I mean, you just have to see the syllabus, that word there, for example, personality and OB, and I made 3 pages note on each of the word possible. So from the recommended books, if the books were not there, from the internet. And needless to say, when I was making those notes, I mean, I always would, if I can find a diagram, if I can find an example, I would just incorporate it there. And just those 3 pages notes, for almost 3 to 4 pages notes for every topic I prepared. But the syllabus is a little vast for management. There are 12 modules, and each module has a number of, because it's a subject, every module is a subject in itself. So I think it becomes a lot overall. At the end of the day, when I stood and saw my notes, they were a lot, and it was a lot to consume now. Now, consumption of that material also takes different effort. And that is when, so I remember I consumed this material next year when the prelims was postponed because of second wave of COVID. So I hadn't consumed it before that. After this 3 months, I started focusing on the GSs. And that 1 month I got, and that 1 month I kind of did management and I internalized it. And after that, the effort was very less.
So, in these 3 months, you did not look at GS at all, or were you spending some time on GS also?
I did. So, like I mentioned, when I started in May till June, I had seen some of polity and histories. During that time, I used to just revise the polity again and again on the weekends. So I did Lakshmikant in iterations, and that kind of helped Lakshmikant settle very well in my mind. So it is not a book that should be read once, all at once. It should be done in iterations and with some chapters at a time. So I would say I finished Spectrum also and Lakshmikant also on the weekends. I mean, I used to revise very frequently.
So, instead of covering one entire subject of polity or one entire history in one go, you divided into parts and you studied by giving breaks.
Yeah, so weekends was the time when I would try to memorize and internalize stuff. And while I was working and I was doing the manual labor, that is when I made my notes.
Okay. Coming to management optional, what exactly did not work the first time, or what went wrong, and how did you improve upon those in the second attempt?
Right. So, like I mentioned before, management, one thing I was very comfortable was with the maths portion. I mean, coming from IIM Ahmedabad, and I've written CAT, and the level of questions that management option, that UPSC asks in management optional is easier than what it was at IIM Ahmedabad comparatively. However, it was paper one in which I got 103, and the paper two I got 142. But that was a surprise to me. I was not expecting those marks. Last year, when I had written my mains, and if you were to ask me out of the 7 papers, which one went best, I would have said management one. And I saw 103 and I was surprised, and I kept cursing management for the very longest time. And I spoke to a lot of people, and I was all hazed. And, I wanted to know, what am I doing so wrong? So this time I decided that after, crying for a while and making a big fuss out of it, that something needs to be done. So what I did a number of things in management one this time, and I'll probably go over them. So I analyzed the paper all over again. Management one may, I personally feel that there's not much left to ask. Whatever is in the syllabus, they've already asked it. So the questions are more or less repeated. So I challenged myself. I kept asking myself that, when the questions are already there in front of you, why are you still not scoring? So this time I added value to my notes that I had prepared. For example, I started substantiating every point with an example. This I did in GS also. So every point with an example, I pulled out my case studies from IIM Ahmedabad, and I picked up examples from there. I found a diagram for almost everything if possible. But in recollecting all of that also becomes a little difficult. For example, I'll give you an example. Very simple thing. And this question is also asked a lot in UPSC. What is the difference between strategic intent, mission, goal, objective? And I had this time I kind of mucked up the goal of Microsoft. Mission of Microsoft, vision of Microsoft, and what will be the goal to differentiate between them, and so on and so forth. And for strategy also, strategic management, I had good examples. For cross-border mergers and acquisitions, again, IIM Ahmedabad helped in whatever my case studies were there. There were examples I picked up from here, there, everywhere, that why PNG did work, and why, for example, again, BCG matrix. So this question comes almost every year. Please tell us what is a BCG matrix. Now in BCG matrix, this time I also drew a company profile of HUL to explain BCG matrix, that which one is cash cow for it and which one is a question mark for HUL. So this is how I tried to improvise on it. And one thing that I also did was that, apart from examples, I tried to shorten my syllabus. With every iteration, I used to reduce my notes. I used to keep reducing them down so that revision becomes easy. So that is how I made a lot of changes. And then lastly, what I did was, in management, I solved the past 5 to 6 year papers, and I would say that 70% of it is repeated, and I reproduced the same thing from my notes to there with all the masalas added and the masalas I've just told you about. That is what I did differently this year.
That's actually very important to realize, because what you did is not something extraordinary. In fact, it is something very basic that we are taught in schools somehow, to add examples, to add diagrams. But we forget about these things as we enter college, as we try and make things more complex. So I think you just went back to the basics, and that probably worked for you. Coming to the basics, I want to touch upon two important things. One is answer writing, both for GS as well as management, in terms of test series. So let's start with that. So what was your strategy like? How important is it? And did you write answers every day, or did you write test every week? What kind of method did you follow, and what do you feel is a better way of practicing answer writing?
I am personally not comfortable with writing answers without preparing. So I wouldn't say that I would just write 2 answers and whatever I know. No, that doesn't work for me. I have to prepare the subject and then I'll write the paper. So I need to know the syllabus, it is then only it is reflective of what you'll actually be writing. So for GSs, I would always focus on preparing for the subject, GS 1, 2, 3, 4. Last year it was a little different because it was my first time and I was writing answers for the first time, so I had taken sectional tests. But this year I had taken full length test. I used to finish GS2, write the paper, finish GS4, write the paper, and so on and so forth. For management, there was no guidance or no test series also available. So what I did was I solved past year papers, and I solved them like I would write a final answer, and after that I checked it myself and I added more content to it or more examples, or I added more beautification to it, use the keywords. So they like these keywords like effectiveness, efficiency, satisfaction, involvement, empowerment, throw them all in. So that is what I tried this time. Yeah.
Now, this brings me to a very interesting thing, and this is about self evaluation, something about which students are normally very scared. So, I've been trying to work on this for some time, but I've not been able to, create something structural around it. But I realized the importance of self evaluation. That's what you just talked about. How did you get the confidence of evaluating your own answer yourself and then telling yourself, okay, this is the mistake and I know this is wrong and I'm going to correct it by inculcating something else? Because the normally students have this to say, how do I know what is right and what is wrong? If somebody else could tell me, it would be easier. So what gave you that confidence and that direction to do it yourself?
No, I would look at my answer and I would think to myself, now I have all the resources. How do I add more value to it? I can use the internet and I can pour in some example. So let's go look for an example. Let's go look for a more effective advantage or a disadvantage. These are the questions that come in management, right? Let's find the words that are relatable to it. So, okay, fine, I've used this word, but instead of saying this, if I were to say that it will increase the employee morale and productivity, which is again another topic or subject in it, it sounds better. So I spent time thinking all of that in those terms, and also I compared my copies with Pankaj Yadav sir's copies. He cracked last year, and I used to see what is the difference that is coming in, and if there was a difference or if there was something which is not right. So I would pick up his example and incorporate it into mine. So my notes were this time my notes were a little different. Now this time my notes were just the past year papers.
You also talked about revision a little bit, and that is what I want to focus upon. Uh, Unfortunately, we still don't know how to revise effectively. We are never taught how to revise, most effectively, so that we can internalize, as you said, internalize certain concepts. So, what do you think is the right way, or what was your way of revising on weekends?
I think it varies from person to person, but how I did it was different for GS and different for management. For GS, it was always iterative and incremental in nature. I'll focus on management first. So in management, suppose I've done OB. Now in OB, I'll try to reduce my notes, just like I mentioned, so that when I start my next iteration, I'll just have to probably from 40 pages, I'll come down to 20. And by the time it's the final exam, only 5 pages one day before you can just browse through those 5 pages and you're done. Now in terms of GS also, I try to do something similar. Like for example, I would try to note out a very interesting point or a case law or a fact on a different sheet of paper, and probably look at that sheet of paper in the next iteration and try to recollect the points out of those selected few points. Because I think this exam is also a lot about recollecting what you've read. We read a lot. I mean, you're reading the newspaper, you're reading so many books, but it's also, and you know a lot. But exam के दिन वहाँ पे पेपर के सामने याद आना चाहिए ना, and you have to be able to actually pour it down on the sheet of paper. Then only it'll be rewarding, and that is what I would do, that reverse engineering of actually being able to recollect the point out of that keyword.
So this is what I call active revision, just to make it easier for students to understand. Wherein instead of just going through the notes, you try and recollect what you actually wrote about 2 days back, 1 week back,
Right.
whatever, and then you match it with what exactly you wrote, and then you try and question yourself. So I think it's the same thing. Yes, it works. Anything that you feel that you would want to share with the students? Any advice or anything out of your personal experience from this preparation before we finish off with the session?
I personally feel that management is a very easy optional. I mean, it is a one time effort. If you have your notes in place, I think the questions are more or less repeated. And the questions are also very easy. What is personality? What is Globe framework? Hofstede framework? It is not very difficult. So, I mean, if one wants to actually go ahead with it, it is a good optional. However, scoring very high marks is becomes a little challenging. So, if one wants to take management, one can probably take it, but it doesn't have an overlap with GS. But it does help in your thought process with essays and ethics also to some extent. But it since it doesn't have an overlap with GS, but it kind of leaves a lot of time for GS preparation during the break between prelims and mains, and that is one advantage I felt. Then there is less competition also in this optional. So if one wants to do it, one shall have faith in their abilities. One challenge that I feel with management is to finish the paper too. It is very difficult to complete that paper in time, and more or less a lot of people I know end up at least leaving 20 or 15 marker question. So that needs a lot of practice and selecting the right questions to be able to finish that paper. And I would say that the numericals that are asked in management are very easy, so one should not be scared of them, and one should try to practice them as many as possible. They are very simple. For example, linear programming is very easy. In operations, you every year they get EOQ model questions. Now again, that is also pretty much doable if you have like some effort you've put in, and 2-3 days of effort is enough to be able to master these numericals. And numericals at least 0-1 game, you can get a lot of marks because of them. So but it can also be a double-edged sword, because if you end up making a mistake, then you may get hassled and not be able to finish your paper in time. So overall, I would say if one wants to take this paper, it should solely be on the basis of one's interest, abilities, and background, and the preparation strategy. I mean, does it fit into the entire overall preparation strategy of yours or not? I mean, it did not, mathematics, I would say, did not fit into my preparation strategy, because I was doing it with GS preparation and again maths. GS preparation and a job. So hence management was a pragmatic and a good choice, and it eventually bore fruits. So I am happy with the outcome. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Madhav, for coming here and sharing your thoughts. So that was it for this interview. I'm very sure that you got answers to some very basic questions that we as UPSC aspirants have. And instead of being fearful of the examination now, you are inspired and you have those answers to take the steps ahead and try and crack it in your next attempt itself. With this, we come to the end of this session. If you have any doubts, if you want to get in touch with Madhav, you can put it in the comment section below. We'll try and create something so that if you need any guidance for management optional or anything at all, you have availability of the toppers of this year, and you can minimize your effort and maximize your output with the same. All the best. Take care. I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.